We have a question from the audience. As Jim uh, showed an example of the water prices comparison with the lunar source or the terrestrial source, or reusable or non-reusable. So do you think water is the first product that can be sold in space, or are there any other possibilities?
Uh, this is a, I am smiling because this is a very perceptive question, a very good question. So let me give an answer that is challenging. I think the space resources sector believes that water for the use of LOX hydrogen propellant is the primary or first market product. And I think there's a very good chance that it is a very important product. But it's not the only thing we should be considering. When we develop systems to process lunar sourced water ice, these locations, the locations on the lunar surface, are primarily the permanently shadowed regions of the polar craters at the north and the south poles of the moon. Extracting this water ice requires complex systems in very demanding cryogenic temperatures, using technologies that we have not fully matured. And I think there's also a lot of consensus that if we build these systems to go for water ice, we should also consider the other rich minerals in the lunar regolith and how to use them. So we should think of any celestial ore body as an integrated resource-rich system of minerals, and identify a range of primary minerals, whether it's water ice, titanium, oxygen, iron, nickel, or other elements. Excuse me for my cough. Whether we extract a range of them and use them for other products as well. And I think that's very important to think about. And then when we do think about that, it really forces us to be very honest with ourselves about what is the real market. What can we sell as soon as we have this, either this raw mineral or a fabricated processed product? What can we sell? Who is really going to purchase? Who is really going to buy? And the reason I emphasize the sales contract is we look, our space agencies lead the way globally in terms of developing capability, technologies, allowing us to prototype new approaches and methodologies for lunar and other resource utilization. But if we are to make a successful business that scales, we must deal with the customer first and primarily. The most important question is the market. The most important question is the customer. So when we say, well, what are the products? It is going to depend on who are the customers. And this is the real challenging question. And so I also have another point to this. So firstly, I believe it is a collection of mineral resources. Whenever we go for water, yes, that is the primary product that we can identify. But I think it's wise to then prepare a range of product capabilities. And that's market dependent. And my second point is that I actually think in parallel to the raw resource extractions component of the space resources industry, the space manufacturing and fabrication sector may also hold great opportunity. And that could be Earth-sourced materials, but processed and manufactured in space, may hold also great opportunities. The question is, the big question are, what are those markets? There are some early examples of products manufactured in space for Earth-based use that then have value. And really, if we were to consider the launch costs and operations, if we're talking about processed products in space, we need to think about something that can sell for $20,000 to $30,000 a kilogram right now. And as launch vehicle pricing drops, that can drop correspondingly. But if you think of what could we make a kilogram of that and sell back on Earth for $30,000 that can't be made on Earth, then you have new exploding markets.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question for Mark. As we know that there are a lot of commercial companies going to the moon soon with the Artemis program, right? They're, say, about to sell the soil or maybe even water from the moon. The current legal system can it protect the company's right to sell those products if they can make it?
Yes, I think that, as I mentioned, I touched upon, I think we have clarity now in the international community that private entities can assert ownership rights over the resources they extract. Not when they're in the ground. We can't own the property. But once the resources are extracted, they are the property of the private entity that extracted them. And that has been made explicit in the domestic laws of the United States, which says as much, and in Luxembourg as well, that that extracted resources can be the subject of ownership, which means then that you have the right to do as you wish with them, including sell those resources. So I think that issue, thank goodness, is behind us. So we can now turn our attention to other things such as priority rights.
Okay. And also, you mentioned that the commercial companies should share the information to the paradigm shift. For example, if Jim answered the question, do you want to share information with other companies to promote this industry in some sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's that good question. And Mark, you in your excellent account of the legal context, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with this this paradox, if you like, or a potential tension, in that commercial companies seeking competitive advantage in both in terms of developing product and identifying resource, will have a natural tendency, a natural tension in revealing the nature of the resource in order to secure the rights. And I think the appetite for commercial companies to participate in that information process is in direct proportion to the level of trust in the integrity and the enforcement of that regulatory framework. So if there is common trust that the framework is sound and it is non-corruptible, and there is integrity in that everybody subscribes to it, and that there is a form of enforcement equal to any other enforcement in general business operations, I think it would be a very important factor and idea.
Yeah, I think you're. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I like that idea that the willingness to share will arise in proportion to the level of trust that the companies will be protected. And a great analog to that is our intellectual property system, our patent system. If you have the recipe for the world's greatest chicken, we all are familiar with KFC the world over. If you have trust in the patent system, you will divulge that recipe, knowing that you will in fact have a monopoly to use that recipe for the next 20 years. And if you really believe that and you trust in that enforcement system, then you will divulge that recipe and share it with the world. But if you do not trust in that system, the other option is to keep it secret. And that's exactly what KFC does, by the way, is no one knows what their recipe is. So that's the other, if you don't trust in the ability to be protected, then the other option is to be secretive. And that's a decision that every company will have to make. And I think you're right to, the question is, can you keep the location of your resources secret? How long can you keep it secret? You may try to keep it secret as long as possible and avail yourself of the existing protections only when it's necessary or when the secret slips out about where the resources are. Once you begin operating on the moon.
And
So
Mark,
you're right.
Mark, another question I would have around that, if I may. So if a company identifies an area of resource interest that they want to establish permits for and turn that reserve into a resource or resource into a reserve. In the Outer Space Treaty, as I understand it, already establishes the principle of non-interference for systems that are in place undertaking useful, legitimate activity. So if, for example, a spacecraft had landed and was doing scientific assays and experimentation, then the case becomes much stronger for establishing this precedent or establishing the right of that entity to maintain a right to first permit, should we say, whilst the permitting process is undertaken. So the question I have is, if as I assume that you're alluding to is, let's say we have a remote observation or a remote assay or analysis, particularly say of an asteroid, a near-Earth asteroid, or a piece of celestial body, or a location on the moon that is remotely observed, remotely deemed to be of interest by that company, but there's no physical spacecraft or asset. Are you suggesting that this framework entity can also maintain the that permitting sequence for that company if they've made the observation and they can verify interest with that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and that is one of the areas that we are going to have to test and learn about. But I think with respect to getting the protection of licensing conditions, I think that could happen prospectively. And it's a good reason to have companies seek a payload review as early as possible so that the licensing agency is aware of your plans to go to the nearest asteroid. And then hopefully that agency will not approve any other launch licenses to the same asteroid that might interfere with your activities. Now, so I think that's a reason to seek the review early, to share the information early. Now, the harder question is in the international level. If you simply issue a press release that you have discovered platinum on an asteroid and you plan to land there in 5 years, is that enough to trigger the international obligation to prevent any other country from going to that asteroid and mining it before you get there. I think you have to really put yourself in the mindset of the International Court of Justice facing that question. You know, that you would have to have, in order to enforce that obligation, you'd have to have the US government sue the other government, the government of the other company, bring them before the International Court of Justice and make an argument that you have your company, and therefore the United States, had a legitimate, protectable interest that should be protected under the due regard principle. And, you know, I think that, you know, you have to be prepared to make that argument, or at least make it, because I don't know how quickly we're going to get to the ICJ, but that is the way in which countries will implement their obligations. I think that's the mindset that they will be in. And I think that companies have to be in that mindset as well, to make the argument in the press, in the United Nations registry, to provide this persuasive detail that you have a protectable interest. And that would probably be based on what your investment has been. If you've invested $1 billion, planning on recouping that from mining the asteroid, I would argue that's a protectable, legitimate interest.
Mm. And that would be, but again, that I guess the advantage would be if there was already an international agreement that corresponding launch licensing by a nation state is in parity and in agreement, especially for space resource business, is that there is MOUs between the agencies and the countries that, let's say, at least, I don't know, let's just sandbox this for a moment to experiment with an idea. Yeah. For space resource utilization, that one nation's licensing with some specific criteria basically becomes an international, under some international body, becomes a de facto, as you say, it's out there that this company has a claim for a certain period of time, should certain criteria be met, that no other entity anywhere has access to that claim. And I guess the criteria have to be put in place that it's not just then a case of telescopes pointing outwards and then 4,000 claims being made arbitrarily. You know, there has to be some legitimacy to the action. And the other way is to, whilst that global international legal framework is being established, the other way is to you know, go finger licking chicken, and maybe keep quiet about the discoveries until you can directly launch and minimize the gap excuse me, between either licensing or announcement and action to establish a physical active presence that falls right within the Outer Space Treaty's definition of legitimate claim, or legitimate, at least, claim to non-interference.
Yeah, I think those are exactly the ideas that companies need to have. And I think you're right, that this argument for a protectable interest will be more successful if, one, you have skin in the game, you stand to lose, that is, you've invested money. That will make it protectable, more protectable. And then if you're actually working it and you're present. So I would recommend companies get some rover or an assayer, something on the celestial body as soon as possible, in order to make this argument that they have an active, protectable interest. I think you're right about that.
And Meng Su or Tianhong, what is what is your opinion around this field of, say, the selection of the resource and the protection of the rights? How would you think about this?
When we're planning for the Tianhong satellite, I mean space telescopes, we do realize that there is no near-term way to protect information that we may collect about potential mining targets. So for us, since this field is in early stage, I think we hope to promote the field in the early stage. There's no competition yet. So in the future, it depends on how soon there could be an international agency to license anything about any kind of information to a certain level. We're not sure about who and when it's going to happen. But what we are sure about is that we do need more telescopes, more efficient way to find potential interesting targets, since the near Earth objects with diameter 10 meter, 20 meter ish, potentially could be mined for the first generation of spacecrafts. There are millions, but only we will find tens of thousands. So there's a lot to be discovered. I think when we discover more and more, the potential interest from the community could be increased by certain, I think by a lot. So that's why we hope to use ground-based telescopes plus spaceborne telescopes, and we believe spaceborne telescopes in the future will be more cost-effective. We can launch more and in a relatively short time scale with multi-wavelengths. In particular, infrared provide our information about the composition. So that's our motivation. So we can't build the frame by ourselves. So we basically just to increase our capability to get more information about asteroids. That's all we are doing. But we do hope to, when we talk to investors, we say our information will collect more and more information, and maybe there is some big giant company want to do space mining, we can provide information to these companies. So at least we hope this information could be valuable, even it's not legally protected. We don't want to keep secret, but we also hope to build business model based on these data sets.
Yes, yes, and I think there are many, there are many business models where there is a certain establishment of the commons in terms of baseline information, and then baseline information or system or capability that is available to all, and then the opportunity to exploit for business competitive advantage that open source data and information. So I think there are many ways to approach how we can go about this to establish cooperative, fair and mutually supportive business opportunities and economic opportunities, because the market is vast. The potential for the space economy, I think before the end of the next century can be bigger than the Earth economy. And so it's a vast opportunity. There's no shortage. The key is stability and good trusted systems, trusted regulations and frameworks, trusted transactions, as Nick was saying earlier. And there's a huge opportunity. Yes.
Yeah, I think we all believe that. The problem is, as Jim, in your talk, you mentioned that somehow we have to find the right business model to keep this field alive for next 10 to 15 years before we actually, you know, to see more overlap between the vision model and the business model. So so how to get, how to you know, keep survive and also try to grow, build more technology, get more experience in the next 10 to 15 years? What's your near-term vision?
So it's simply follow the customer.
You mean the customer from the terrestrial resource mining?
If you have a customer that wants materials from asteroids, please let me know. I would be very interested to speak with them today. So the follow the customer is the customer can be anywhere. Now, the planet that I know with the most aliens on it is the third one from the sun. It's this one. So this is where the customers are. And actually, if we look at the business models of many of the successful space ventures over the last, let's say 5 to 10 years, they are predominantly actually all Earth-facing businesses. They are just providing a space segment for Earth data, communications, or other information sharing services. And then they add value with data optimization and analytics or intelligence on top of that. So the interesting thing is that the overlap between building a space segment for Earth-facing services and building space segment for space resource utilization, the overlap is in many tens of percent of engineering and systems capability. There are differences in terms of robustness when we're talking about real extraction, robustness, longevity, and command and control and autonomy. But starting a business in the space segment facing Earth is a great start. And I know it's been attempted before. There were the first generation, if you like, of asteroid mining companies, Planetary Resources and Deep Space Industries, tried to close the market gap, at least in narrative. And it was very, very difficult to do in the decade before last, in the last decade. And I do recall that both of those companies made several attempts to micro pivot their project-facing direction to either Earth observation or some other services. And it was a little difficult because they were, I think, trying to do it as a reaction, having failed to generate investment capital necessary to really progress their primary objective. So if we take those lessons learned, and for all the, for Origins, for ourselves, and any other companies thinking of doing this, and young entrepreneurs listening on this event, thinking about the opportunities for their future, plan ahead is my recommendation. Plan ahead and base keep your vision in your heart and your business model in your head, and identify where you can make your first revenues within 36 months by developing know-how and technologies and competitive differentiation that take you in some way on the direction and the path you want. And look, it can start from anywhere. It can start from communications, computing, IoT, blockchain, and it can be even completely terrestrial in the segment. Excuse me. The trick is to make a start make a first foothold on technology and capability development, learn what you need about building the team and the business processes, regulation, financial control, the mundane things of growing and scaling a company, and build a good team around you. And use that as, just like when you climb a mountain or a cliff, we're not Supermen, so we don't make it in one leap. We go foothold by foothold, step by step, very carefully. And we try not to slip and fall. And building the business is just the same. You can get to the top of a mountain by 100 different routes along the cliff face. So that's my excuse me, my recommendation is to make a start. But the key thing for business, the business framework is the only framework that will allow us to scale for in-space resource industry. There's no point in trying to start it as an experiment or an academic effort or an agency effort if we don't have the plan for full commercial market expansion and scaling. As a species, we are driven by the needs of resources and security, protection, and love for the family and friends and the people we care about around us. So we all share common drives. Those drives are manifested in a system of transactions that is economy. That is where we have gone over the last 20,000 years. And the economic framework is the manifestation of our very fundamental human nature and drives. So we must leverage that going forward. So anything we build must fall within the dynamics and the rules of the transaction exchange system called our economy. And that is by business. So I am being very, very pedantic about this because in a lot of the space industry people, as we all know, we are all passionate about opening this new frontier. And sometimes our passion can get ahead of our hearts can get ahead of our heads at many times. And I am guilty of this myself. And so we must maintain discipline, business discipline. And whatever plan we have must, as you say, must allow us to survive and go step by step. So my recommendation is, when I say follow the customer, follow any customer that gives you 25% of the skill set of what you need to develop. So if you want to develop robotic spacecraft that can mine asteroids, either look to build a communication satellite or some mining equipment or sensors, and it doesn't matter who you sell to in terms of market segment, but build the business and start off and then pivot up and out. And actually, if we look at history, the most successful space entrepreneurs, almost the vast majority, have all come from different sectors, established their business skills and technology skills, developed a capital base of their own resources, and which allowed them to then kick off their projects by putting some of their own money in and building from there. And they followed the customer. Jeff Bezos started Amazon already being passionate about space since he was a young man. Elon Musk has always had dreams to go into space and found his route and his calling about how he could do that. And they're both executing, and there are many other examples of people who are executing in this kind of model.
how much overlap do you think space mining has with existing terrestrial mining industry in terms of business model, technology readiness, development history, anything we can borrow? We can see the overlap, and or I think my question is, do you think it's space mining is like a mirror or like a century delay compared with terrestrial mining? Is it the same thing?
I'll answer that question as to my best experience on two levels. First, from a business compatibility and then a technology compatibility. I think from business compatibility, there are some things that can be learned from the terrestrial mining sector that can be applied to the space sector, particularly lunar mining in a gravity well. I think there is the mining industry terrestrially has a great deal of experience and know-how with the conditions that we have on Earth. I think in terms of, is the terrestrial mining industry interested in the space industry? I would say from a business opportunity or resource perspective, it's somewhere between 0 and 0 right now. Simply because the terrestrial mining industry is a very precise, economically driven business, and they look for the economic rationale, the economic justification before anything else. And in their mind, there's no immediate advantage or opportunity cost, shall we say. The opportunity cost of looking at a space resource project from a net present value perspective, it just does not compare to existing terrestrial opportunities. The shareholders would not allow such a diversification of resource or financial resources. From the technological level, I think there are techniques in the terrestrial mining sector and approaches that are valuable to look at for the mining sector, space mining sector. I think there are the approaches of exploration, assay, exploitation, processing, refinement, the supply chain and the value chain, process chain methodologies. I think there's a lot of learning for us in the space industry that we could draw from the terrestrial mining industry. From the other direction, I think it's quite possible that some of the technologies developed for space mining and observation and sensing, and especially autonomy, can be applicable back to the terrestrial mining industry. So there would be always some interest, I think, in that approach. But I caution against trying to make too many connections of process between terrestrial mining and translating that to space-based mining, at least from a conventional sense. Conventional terrestrial mining is very specific to big ore bodies, very mature, low-cost transport economics, and a huge market. So there's a huge market, global market for commodities. The challenge with the space mining economic scenario is that the transport costs are way too much to justify bringing raw materials from space resources to Earth. So the space resource or mineral that we extract is really targeted for in-space use. And the challenge is that the market is, well, non-existent kind of right now, and will take years to grow to even a few players. So that the economics and the margins have to be just the other end of the scale. So the space mining industry is the equivalent of the terrestrial mining industry hundreds of years ago to some extent. You know, it's picks and shovels, huge margins of profitability. Initially difficult transportation logistics, but then as soon as the opportunity or the resource is identified, those transport costs will plummet. And so I think the mature mining industry is, I think we can learn a lot from it, but it's also not the model to follow for the next 10 to 20 years at least, until transportation costs reduce and all the other costs reduce, until we get to mass end user identification and all sorts of other aspects.
I see.
Okay. Yeah, let me ask a question from the audience. Since our first speaker today, Mr. Nick Children, is now attending this panel, but he mentioned the blockchain technology could help to protect the information that Mark just mentioned that companies should share with each other, right? Do you guys think is it necessary to apply such, say, blockchain technology to help to protect the value of the information and help the companies more confident to share the information? Is it necessary?
I could take a stab at that, Jim, if you don't mind. I am very curious about blockchain. It is the buzzword of 2020, 2019. And I'm still looking for a convincing case for the need of blockchain. We all know it's an extremely expensive method requires a good deal of energy. What is the benefit that is worth the investment? And I do think that one of the benefits could be the transparency and the verifiability that blockchain provides that can be beneficial to a system of registering priority rights, because it's important that the location of a claim be verified and be available for the entire public to view, and also the order in which a registration for a particular area is received. And that system needs to be, very reliable. It needs to be trusted. If we develop a system that provides priority rights based on the first entity to register such rights, everything then it hinges on the reliability and the transparency of that registry. And I think blockchain provides that transparency and that reliability. So I think that to me is one of the strongest arguments for the use of blockchain.
And I'll add to that is the ability to have asymmetrically transacted smart contracts means that we can distribute nodes anywhere in the solar system, and even if there is a lag in communication time, the trusted network, or the trustless network approach, shall we say, means that even if nodes nearer to Earth and Earth orbit and system in space haven't been updated, that the lag times in updating the chain from different locations, so that at any one time, excuse me, at any one time, let's say within a region around the entire asteroid belt or near Earth space, there could be any number of registry nodes of a blockchain register of rights and permits and claims, etc., that may be at different, shall we say, different levels of updating. Now, that should not be after a few minutes or tens of minutes or hours maximum. That will be, they will all synchronize. And I don't think space operations will happen in at the speed of minutes or hours. But what it does mean is that there can be a high degree of confidence that claims made autonomously in situ by a regulated system along this autonomous network, those claims can be trusted, and the information will update and ripple through. I mean, maybe that could be a service level agreement that at least to the asteroid belt, we could say within 24 hours time, there is always full verification of the level of claims and identity and ownership and transactions of any activity in space. So that's one advantage I see is the distributed and asymmetric nature of the transaction network.
Okay, thank you. I think it's about time to conclude this panel. Mark and Jim, do you want to add say a last statement of your opinion to the space resources industry?
Mark, do you want to go ahead or?
Oh, please.
Well, just to say, I mean, it's been a pleasure to participate in this event, and I think it's very important that we particularly have great forums like this to continue discussing and sharing ideas, building, let's say, cultural and individual connection, that we can understand how to work together and be good competitors in the business framework. And the stronger competition, cooperation, collaboration that we can have as we build the market forward, the better the stability and the security of in-space operations and safety can be. When you're out to sea, if a ship is in distress, we will all rush to help. And I think what brings us together as a spacefaring species, as humanity setting its first footprints out into the solar system and establishing the nature of who we are as we go out to the stars, what binds us together and brings us together as a species. When we look out to the challenges that we will face in the cosmos, far overrides the historic differences we have over thousands of years as tribes and species and as tribes and peoples. We are naturally competitive in closed systems, but as we open out into space, it is better to go out as one species and have good competition and good collaboration.
Thank you.
I don't think I could add much to that. Beautifully said. I want to thank the organizers for putting this together. I think this is a rare historical opportunity for us as an international community, as Jim said, to work together and to develop a system that showcases the very best of humanity and the best of our ideas. This is a critical time to do that, because we will, before we all know it, we will be extracting resources and a market will be operating. And it's important that we establish the practices and the principles properly. And that will only be done if we can talk as we are here. And I think it was a silver lining of the pandemic that it gave rise to these virtual symposia. And I feel like the conversations have been more active than ever before. Even though we are apart, we are together through Zoom and this other technology. And I want to thank the organizers for doing this. And I also want to point out that, and thank you for involving a lawyer in these business discussions. One thing I tell my students is that if you're going to regulate something, you need to understand what you're regulating. And so it's very important for the lawyers and policymakers to speak with the entrepreneurs and the business visionaries before we do anything. And this has been extremely valuable to me. So I want to thank everyone, and in particular, Jim, for an enlightening discussion.
Meng, you want to add some comment?
I just want to thank Mark and Jim for the very exciting and motivative discussion. I think Orange Space is only established for less than 3 years, but we really hope to promote the field in China and hope to connect international activities with aerospace activities in China. So we hope to build a bridge. If you have any interest.
Well, seems his connection is just broke down. Well, I know he's going to say that we want to be the bridge and help the international community to cooperate more with the Chinese community in this space industry. And thank you all for your wonderful talk and terrific discussion. We already have 2 sessions yesterday, and will be one last session this afternoon, which is laws and policy. And Mark will know that. And they're the profession. There's also lawyers and policymakers and international law professionals to discuss in more details, maybe how the laws and policy will affect the space resources industry. And all the videos will be online afterwards. And this event is supported by EC Beijing and the Nanjing Economic Zone. Thank you for their help, and thank you for all the speakers. This afternoon, we start at 3:00 p.m. Beijing time. If you can come, welcome. Yep. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Sorry, I
Thanks,
lost my
Mark.
internet
Thanks, John.
connection.
Thank you,
Good to see
Thank you,
you.
Mong.